He was the last heir to a line of emperors, a 16-year-old boy who dared to challenge a king and the Pope. His reward for that courage? A public execution. But his death wasn't just an execution. It was a brutal display of absolute power, a chilling message sent to Rome announcing that a new ruthless order had arrived. It's a message that, according to some legends, was delivered in the most gruesome way imaginable. This is the story of how a great dynasty died on a scaffold in Naples. This is the story of Conradin, the last of the Hohenstaufen. To really understand the tragedy of the boy King Conradin, you first have to grasp the towering legacy he was born into. His family, the Hohenstaufen, weren't just some noble house. They were a dynasty of German kings and Holy Roman emperors who, for over a century, had dominated the political landscape of Europe. These men were giants. Conradin's grandfather, Emperor Frederick II, was known to a stunned and admiring world as Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. He was a master of languages, a patron of arts and sciences, a cunning diplomat, and a warrior to be feared. From their castles in Germany to the sun-drenched shores of Sicily, the Hohenstaufen eagle was a symbol of immense power. But that power came with a massive price tag. For generations, the single defining struggle for the Hohenstaufen was their titanic clash with the papacy. And this wasn't just a war of words. It was a fundamental conflict over who would control the destiny of Italy and, by extension, the Christian world. The popes in Rome saw the Hohenstaufen ambition as an existential threat. To them, having a single ruler control both the Holy Roman Empire to the north and the rich kingdom of Sicily to the south was like being caught in an iron pincer, one that threatened to crush the papal states and reduce the pope to nothing more than the emperor's personal chaplain. This fear fueled a century of brutal conflict, a sprawling war that split Italy into two ferocious camps: the Guelphs, who backed the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who swore loyalty to the emperor. Popes excommunicated emperors, and emperors marched their armies right up to the gates of Rome. It was into this world of epic ambition and lethal hatred that Conradin was born in 1252. You could say his birthright was a poisoned chalice. His father died when Conradin was just 2, leaving the boy a string of magnificent titles: King of Jerusalem, King of Sicily, Duke of Swabia, but with almost no real power to back them up. He grew up an orphan in his family's lands in Bavaria, a king without a kingdom, his claims mostly ignored. Germany itself had fallen into a period of chaos known as the Great Interregnum, where rival princes fought for scraps of power, and the emperor's authority had all but vanished. Meanwhile, down in his lost kingdom of Sicily, his own uncle, a brilliant but illegitimate son of Frederick II named Manfred, had first ruled as regent before seizing the throne for himself in 1258, believing a false rumor that young Conradin was dead. While Manfred was a fierce Ghibelline and a good ruler, his power grab only made Conradin's situation more complicated. But the true architect of the Hohenstaufen's doom was the papacy. Pope after pope worked relentlessly to wipe out what they called the viper brood of the Hohenstaufen family from Italy. And they found their perfect champion, a man just as ambitious and ruthless as any emperor, Charles of Anjou, the younger brother of the King of France. Invited by Pope Clement IV, Charles marched into Italy with a powerful French army, which the Church blessed as a holy crusade against the Hohenstaufens. In 1266, at the Battle of Benevento, Charles crushed and killed Manfred. The Pope's champion was now the King of Sicily. With Manfred dead, the Ghibelline cause in Italy seemed completely broken. Their cities were terrified, their armies scattered. In their desperation, they looked north, over the Alps, to the last legitimate heir of Frederick II. They sent envoys to Bavaria, begging the teenage Conradin to come and free Italy. They promised him armies, gold, and the loyalty of the Eternal City, Rome itself. For Conradin, it was the ultimate gamble. He was barely 15. His guardian warned him against it. Pope Clement IV had already threatened him with excommunication, the medieval world's ultimate spiritual weapon. Marching into Italy meant defying the Pope, challenging a seasoned and victorious king, and risking everything on the shifting loyalties of Italian city-states. But what choice did he really have? To stay in Germany meant fading into obscurity, the last dying ember of a once great fire. To go south was to embrace his destiny, to try and reclaim the glorious inheritance of his ancestors. In the fall of 1267, Conradin, filled with the fire of his family, made his choice. He gathered what troops he could and crossed the Alps, descending into Italy like the last eagle of a doomed dynasty. The Pope, hearing of his advance, grimly prophesied that the boy was being led like a lamb to the slaughter. Conradin's arrival in Italy sent a shockwave through the peninsula. The Ghibelline faction, so recently crushed, exploded with new hope. Here was a living symbol of the imperial cause they had fought for so long. As he marched south, his army grew. The great Ghibelline cities of Verona, Pavia, and Pisa hailed him as their savior. He was no longer just a boy with a claim. He was the leader of a serious rebellion. His opponent, Charles of Anjou, was a different breed of man. Where Conradin was young and idealistic, Charles was a hardened political operator in his 40s, a veteran of brutal crusades and twisted court politics. He was devout, yes, but his piety was a weapon for his ambition, a justification for a ruthlessness that shocked even his contemporaries. Having just won the kingdom of Sicily, he had no intention of letting the last viper of the Hohenstaufen line snatch it away. Conradin's campaign started with a series of dazzling successes. His fleet, with Pisan help, defeated Charles's navy. Then, in July of 1268, he made a triumphant entry into Rome itself. The city, which always had a complicated relationship with the papacy, welcomed the handsome young claimant with a passion that was both a political victory and a huge personal boost. They saw in him a romantic hero, the return of his famous grandfather. Pope Clement IV was actually forced to flee Rome and watch from the city of Viterbo, as his enemy occupied the very heart of Christendom. From Rome, Conradin planned to march south and link up with a community of Saracen soldiers at Lucera who had been fiercely loyal to his family for decades. With his army of Germans, Italians, and Spaniards, he believed he could crush Charles once and for all. The stage was set for the final showdown. That confrontation came on August 23, 1268, on the plains near the town of Tagliacozzo. On paper, Conradin had the upper hand. His army was larger, maybe 6,000 soldiers to Charles's 5,000. His Spanish cavalry, led by Henry of Castile, was spoiling for a fight. Confidence in the Ghibelline camp was sky high. Charles of Anjou, however, had a secret weapon: experience. He was with a veteran French crusader, a wily old knight named Allard de Valery. Valery, who had fought in the Holy Land, knew that battles are won with deception, not just brute force. He convinced Charles to use a strategy that was basically unheard of in European chivalric warfare at the time. Charles split his smaller army into 3 parts. 2 were placed out in the open, in plain sight. But the third, his most elite, battle-hardened French knights, he hid completely behind a hill. To complete the trick, Charles gave his own royal armor and banner to another man, a knight named Henri de Coussensés, and put him with the main army. Charles himself, disguised as just another knight, joined the hidden reserve. The battle began exactly as Conradin had hoped. His army charged with ferocious energy, smashing into Charles' first 2 divisions. The Angevin lines bent, and then they broke. It looked like a total rout. In the chaos, the Spanish knights cut their way to the Angevin royal banner. They surrounded the man they thought was Charles of Anjou and struck him down. The banner fell. A massive roar went up from the Ghibelline army. The king is dead. The battle is won. This was the moment they'd been fighting for. And it was the exact moment. It all went wrong. Thinking the fight was over, Conradin's army lost all discipline. The strict battle lines dissolved into a chaotic party. The German knights, following a disastrous tradition, broke ranks and started looting the enemy camp, greedy for the spoils of victory. Others charged off in pursuit of the fleeing soldiers, scattering across the plain. Their victory seemed so total that they threw all caution to the wind. From his hiding spot on the hill, Charles of Anjou watched the enemy army celebrate its own destruction. Then he sprung the trap. He gave the signal. The hidden reserve of 800 elite French knights, fresh and in perfect formation, charged down the hill. They crashed into the disorganized, celebrating Ghibelline army like a thunderbolt. The surprise was absolute. The effect was devastating. An army that had been victorious moments before was now caught completely off guard, scattered, and unable to form a defense. The looters were cut down where they stood. The pursuers were hunted down and destroyed. What had been a battle turned into a massacre. The cheers of triumph turned to screams of panic. Conradin, watching his glorious victory evaporate into a nightmare, had no choice but to flee for his life. The Battle of Tagliacozzo was over. The Ghibelline hope was extinguished in a single, brutal afternoon. Conradin's fateful gamble had failed. The escape from Tagliacozzo was a desperate, humiliating scramble. Conradin and his closest friend, Frederick of Baden, fled the slaughter and raced towards the safety of Rome. But the city that had hailed him as a hero was no longer safe. News of the defeat traveled fast, and in politics, loyalty is a fickle thing. Advised to leave, they continued their flight to the coastal port of Astura, hoping to find a ship to Sicily, where the rebellion against Charles was still flickering. It was at Astura that the final, gut-wrenching betrayal happened. They were captured by the local lord, Giovanni Frangipani. The Frangipani family had once supported the emperors, but the political winds had changed. Seeing a chance to profit and get on the good side of Italy's new master, Frangipani sold his royal captives to Charles of Anjou. Conradin, the last Hohenstaufen, was handed over to his mortal enemy and thrown into a Naples prison, the imposing Castel dell'Ovo. For Charles, just locking him up wasn't enough. Other royal rivals had been kept in comfortable confinement for decades. But Conradin was different. As the last legitimate heir, he would always be a symbol for his supporters, a living reason for future rebellions. Charles needed to make a statement so brutal and so final that no one would ever dare challenge his authority again. The mood in his court was summed up by a cold, simple phrase: Vita Conradini, mors Caroli. Mors Conradini, vita Caroli. The life of Conradin is the death of Charles. The death of Conradin is the life of Charles. To create a thin veil of legitimacy, Charles set up a tribunal in Naples. It was a show trial. Conradin was charged with treason for rebelling against his sovereign, contempt for the church by ignoring his excommunication, and other crimes. The verdict was never in doubt. The execution of an anointed king captured in battle was almost unheard of. It violated the code of chivalry that was supposed to govern Europe's nobility. But Charles was determined. The boy had to die. Legend says that Conradin was playing chess with his friend Frederick when the judges came to pronounce the death sentence. After hearing his fate, he didn't flinch. He just calmly returned to his game. He was 16 years old. On the morning of October 29, 1268, Conradin was led to a scaffold in the public market square of Naples. A huge crowd gathered to watch the unthinkable. Charles of Anjou himself was there to see his rival die. Conradin faced his end with a courage that impressed everyone. On the scaffold, he declared his innocence. In a final dramatic act of defiance, he took off his glove and threw it into the crowd, a symbolic passing of his claim, a last plea for vengeance. His last words were reportedly a cry for his mother back in Germany. "Oh, mother, what sorrows I have caused you." Then he was beheaded. Immediately after, his loyal friend, Frederick of Baden, was also executed. Another legend claims that as Conradin's blood soaked the scaffold, an eagle swooped down from the sky, dipped its wing in the blood, and flew away. A final, mournful salute to the last of the Hohenstaufen. But the brutality wasn't over. Charles needed to send a message, not just to the Ghibellines, but to the man who sponsored his conquest, Pope Clement IV. while some later stories claimed that Charles sent the severed heads of Conradin's followers to the Pope as a gruesome trophy. Such a macabre delivery wasn't even necessary. The message was already crystal clear. Charles had delivered the victory his papal sponsor wanted, proving the Hohenstaufen threat was gone for good. The long war was over. The Pope's champion had won. This brutal act shaped Italy for centuries. Charles of Anjou ruled his new kingdom with an iron fist, leading to deep resentment. The memory of the boy king, martyred in the square at Naples, simmered under the surface. The glove he threw to the crowd became a potent symbol. His claim was eventually taken up by Peter III of Aragon, who had married Manfred's daughter. 14 years later, in 1282, that resentment exploded in a bloody uprising known as the Sicilian Vespers. The French were massacred across the island, and the people of Sicily offered the crown to the House of Aragon. For all his ruthlessness, Charles of Anjou lost the island of Sicily forever. His effort to secure his throne had planted the seeds of his own dynasty's downfall. Conradin's body was eventually moved to a church near the site of his execution, a monument to the boy who was the last of the eagles. The execution of Conradin was a pivotal moment, a brutal end to an entire era. It was the climax of a century-long power struggle between popes and emperors that left a dynasty in ruins and redrew the map of Italy. The cold, calculated politics of Charles of Anjou seemed to have triumphed. But history has a long memory. The shocking death of the 16-year-old king left a scar on Europe and a legacy of hatred that would haunt the new rulers of Sicily. Which leaves us with a final question. Did Charles's brutality really secure his throne? Or did it, by creating a martyr and a burning desire for revenge, ultimately ensure his own dynasty's downfall? If you found this story of dynastic ambition and brutal revenge compelling, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with others who are fascinated by the dramatic and often dark turning points in history. Your support helps us to continue bringing these incredible stories from the past to light. Thank you for watching.